Hello everyone. Thank you for your interest in my Folds modifier setup. It ranked in the top 3 on Blender Market, which is an incredible achievement for me. A lot of people have requested a step-by-step tutorial, and I am pleased to provide one. To follow this tutorial, ensure that you have updated to version 3, which includes a tension map preview feature. The modifier is designed for Blender version 4.2. Additionally, a version compatible with 3.6 is available, which works well for versions up to 4.1. The first issue you may encounter is a Python script alert. This alert is related to the Rigify script that I used to rig the demo objects. You may safely ignore it because it does not affect functionality. The Fold modifier does not utilize Python scripts because it is not an add-on. It is a modifier. So, if it is not an add-on, how do you install it? Open the User Preferences and navigate to the File Paths submenu. Set up the file path to your assets or use the default one, and then save the file in this directory. Optionally, you can add modifiers to a separate catalog. To do this, set the asset browser to the current file mode, create a new category, and then drag and drop all assets into this catalog. Now, let's open our character and set up the modifiers. The first important step is to navigate to the Mesh Data tab and ensure that the Add Rest position is enabled. If a modifier is added without enabling this checkbox, a warning message will be displayed, indicating the oversight. As with any Geometry Nodes asset, there are 2 ways to add it to the scene. One is by dragging and dropping it onto your mesh. Second, add it from the Add Modifier menu. The first modifier calculates tension maps based on deformations, so it is essential to add it after deforming modifiers such as armature modifiers, hooks, or any other deforming modifiers. If you are using only shape key animation, place it first. It should have the original point count, so it must be positioned before a subdivision modifier. The second modifier utilizes tension maps and textures to create folds. The more subdivisions you have, the more pronounced the effect will be. So, I am adding tension maps after the armature so that this modifier can calculate deformations and generate a tension map. I am placing the Fold modifier after the subdivision modifier to ensure there is enough geometry to create folds. After adding modifiers, my model became distorted. This occurred because I haven't added textures yet. So let's disable the texture influence for now and focus on painting them. First, I will go to the armature and set it to a rest pose. This will enable me to use symmetry painting. In the rest pose, the Folds modifier has no effect because the armature does not create any distortions. Now, I will switch to texture painting. As you can see, I have already applied a texture, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I will create a new one from scratch. Let's create a new texture. The default resolution is sufficient. The background color should be set to 50% gray. If you skipped the color selection process, as I did, use the Fill tool to apply a 50% gray fill to the image. Open the image editor in Paint mode and select the Fill tool. Set the color value to 0.5. Textures play a crucial role in the Folds modifier. They represent folds in geometry. The simplest method to create them is to draw by hand. Areas that are lighter than 50% gray will rise above the surface, while darker areas will recede, creating the illusion of folds. I am setting up a texture painting environment and selecting a dark gray color. I could set the color to black, but I prefer to leave some room for adjustment in case, I need to create deeper creases in specific areas. Imagine how the surface creases will form when the character bends this body part. Next, we will add the raised areas. Select the smear tool and slightly blur the edges. Now, I would like to see how this texture appears when applied as folds. To achieve this, you need to add the texture to the modifier. To observe the effect of the texture on the surface, you can utilize the Preview Debug mode. Activate it by checking the Enable checkbox and switching it to Constriction Folds. If you do not have this mode, please download the latest version of the Folds modifier. Now you observe a peculiar effect. The model has contracted across its entire surface, even in areas where we have not yet drawn creases. This occurs because textures need to be switched to non-color data mode, similar to the process typically used with a normal map. Currently, this adjustment can only be made within a shader editor. You can add texture nodes to any material, change the mode there, and then remove the nodes afterward. I can't change the color space because the texture hasn't been saved. Save the image first and then change the color space. That's much better. Note that the colors have also changed. The background gray now matches a 50% gray. Now, I want to observe how the fold will be visible as the surface bends. Therefore, the preview mode should be disabled. I will exit the local view and select the armature to set the pose space. Ops, stretch texture has not been applied yet, so I will disable its influence. Now you can see how it works. In the material preview, you can observe how the tension map functions. In the Preview Debug section, click on the Enable and select the tension map. For example, I expected the area above the knee to constrict. However, it actually stretches. Let's increase the effect of the stretch texture to observe its functionality. You can observe how the tension map is calculated while the animation plays. By the way, if you appreciate how seamlessly I switch between tabs, it's thanks to my Synchronize Workspaces add-on, which you can download for free from the Blender Extensions platform. To enable the add-on, go to Settings and enable the Allow Internet Access. Then, find the add-on under the Get Extensions tab. Now, let's return to our model. It's time to add a stretch map. I will repeat the same process for the second texture. Set the background color and switch the color space to non-color data. I envision the knee bulging, with creases radiating outward from it. You can create the folds in any way you prefer. The choice is yours. Now it is time to add texture to the modifier to observe the results. By the way, if you notice that your folds do not respond to its influence, this indicates that you have not disabled the Preview Debug mode. I want to configure the influence, so it should be turned off. The knees bump from the surface too much. Let's address that. A brush with a color of 50% gray works perfectly. You can draw folds with the modifier enabled to see the results in real time. In this manner, you need to draw all the folds. Let's explore the textures I have used for the model. This is a construction texture. And this is a stretch texture. Using these textures, let us explore the modifier settings. As you can see, the default setting looks bad, so let's address this issue. First and foremost, the base edge distance depends on your model and the size of the faces. I have increased this value to the point where the folds become just visible. The effect scale essentially adjusts the distance of the surface bump. The next 4 items pertain to textures and their influence, concepts with which we are already familiar. Fold Vertex Group feature allows you to specify the application of a modifier by utilizing a vertex group. For example, if I want to exclude creases from the suspenders, I can create a vertex group that includes all geometry except for the suspenders. In the modifier, click this button and select the recently created vertex group. The smooth and smooth iterations apply a smoothing effect to creases. This process is similar to the smooth modifier, but it specifically targets the folds rather than the original geometry. I will reduce the default smoothing factor and increase the base edge distance. The UV map should be named according to your UV map, especially if you are using a different name. The texture offset refers to the background color of the image that we have set for the textures. The smooth factor determines the degree to which the edges of the tension map are blurred. If you want the folds to appear sooner, decrease this value. The normal puff adds extra displacement to the mesh along the fold's normals, resulting in a heavier appearance. The permanent minimum applies folds to the entire mesh at the minimum level. This makes the clothing appear more worn and shabby. Last but not least is the blur tension map. This feature softens the tension map generated by the tension map modifier. You may also be curious about the third asset in the library. This is a material that allows the use of normal maps instead of displacing geometry. To utilize it, only a tension map is required. In this node, you should add 3 normal maps to blend them using the tension map. I will add more features into this workflow in future versions. This concludes the tutorial. I hope you found it helpful.